The entire history of becoming is a continuous transformation of eternal meaning as it is reflected in the mirror of non-being. This realm of non-being, the space within which the demiurge fashions a reflection of the perfect model in Plato's Timaeus, is what Plato calls chora. He describes it as non-being, or as a receptacle that receives being, where being itself consists of the eternal forms or ideas. From this emerges the world of becoming, the reality of change. All change within reality is therefore an endless movement of reflections that continually express the eternal meanings of the Platonic forms. Platonism is far more than merely the philosophy of Plato. It is a unique system that exists somewhere between philosophy and religion, between dialectic and mythology. It is not a rigid doctrinal system with fixed conclusions. Rather, it is itself a living realm of ideas, and these ideas exist in continuous dialectic. It is precisely through this dialectical process that later philosophies developed by participating in and expanding upon its ideas. If you are familiar with Presocratic philosophy, you will understand what I mean when I say that Plato's dialogues gather together nearly all of the philosophical and religious traditions that came before him and place them into conversation with one another. Within Plato we encounter the language of the mystery religions, the Orphic, Eleusinian, Dionysiac, and Pythagorean traditions, as well as the philosophies of Parmenides, Heraclitus, Anaxagoras, Socrates, and many others. Plato's philosophy is therefore a synthesis of the Greek intellectual world as it existed during his lifetime. He recognized that these traditions were not necessarily in contradiction with one another. Instead, each possessed the capacity to explain reality, or at least some aspect of it, through its own perspective. Plato rarely insists with absolute certainty upon what is true or false. He acknowledges his own ignorance, reflecting one of the central teachings inherited from Socrates. Rather than presenting a fixed doctrine, Plato offers ideas that he sometimes favors more strongly than others, while allowing the entire philosophical discussion to remain alive through dialectic. Plato consistently writes in the form of dialogues, allowing different speakers to present different perspectives. He does not establish a strict philosophical doctrine. In the Timaeus, he explains that the best account we can offer of the world, given our condition of existence, is only a likely story. In other words, we cannot know with complete certainty that our explanation is absolutely true. This is not because truth is forever beyond our reach, but because we ourselves participate within it. We are lower expressions of the divine truth that ultimately grounds reality. Since we exist within a world that is constantly changing, our knowledge remains incomplete. Yet through wisdom we are capable of entering into contact with the eternal and unchanging truth that lies behind the reflections of the material world. This is possible because the soul is itself a kind of form or idea. Plato repeatedly teaches that the soul resembles the forms because it is an expression of them. In this sense, the soul already contains absolute knowledge within itself. What is required is not the creation of truth, but its awakening, and the degree to which this awakening occurs is perhaps determined by our love of wisdom. Just as the demiurge first fashioned the world soul before impressing the forms upon the material cosmos, our individual souls participate in that greater world soul, which serves as the mediator between the eternal and unchanging ideas and their reflections within the material world. For this reason, we do not merely possess knowledge of truth. We embody truth within our souls and live it directly. Very few philosophers who study Plato arrive at this realization, yet I believe it is clearly expressed throughout his philosophy. Plato's entire philosophical project resembles an initiation into the mysteries, revealing that ultimate truth is the divine source of life itself, and that truth is something to be lived rather than merely observed. Intellectual knowledge certainly has its place, yet Plato continually teaches that genuine knowledge is found within the soul. Why does Plato insist upon this? Because the soul is, in a profound sense, reality itself. It is life itself. Reality is a living organism, and every one of us participates as a living part within it. Consequently, truth cannot be reduced to rational knowledge alone. Truth is attained through wisdom, embodied through wisdom, while reason serves as the instrument by which we come to understand it. Contrary to popular opinion, Plato never argued that reason alone can reach the truth. Instead, he maintained that reason is the faculty we are able to cultivate in order to bring the soul into harmony and establish a relationship with wisdom. This is the true meaning of philosophy, the love of wisdom. Truth, therefore, extends far beyond the simple knowledge of facts. It must be experienced through the soul itself. The soul escapes from the cave by using reason to enter into communion with wisdom through its love of truth. It is not that truth cannot be known. Rather, truth is always present with us, but the condition of our souls is often not sufficiently developed to attain the highest level of knowledge. Throughout our lives we strive to learn, cultivate, and embody the principles of wisdom, yet it remains uncertain whether any individual can fully grasp all of the eternal forms simultaneously. This appears to be Plato's final conclusion. He firmly believes in eternal being and in an unchanging truth that the soul can approach, yet he does not claim certainty that the entirety of this truth can ever be comprehended all at once. This is precisely why Plato chose to write in dialogues. The search for truth is itself a dialectic among ideas, and this dialectic is the path or the journey of the soul towards its realization. In recent years, new interpretations of Plato and his relationship with the Orphic tradition have emerged. Among the ancient philosophers, Plato preserved perhaps the greatest number of Orphic themes and fragments within his writings. Orphism is frequently regarded as one of the important predecessors of Christianity, while Pythagoreans and Platonists drew profound inspiration from Orphic teachings. Ideas such as the punishment of humanity for a primordial act of wrongdoing, the fall from an original blessed condition, and the longing of the soul to return to that lost paradise are all central elements of the Orphic tradition. There are also theories suggesting that certain Platonic dialogues are deeply shaped by Orphic ideas. This is especially evident in the Phaedo, where Socrates prepares for death and for his descent into the realm beyond earthly life. In this dialogue, Plato presents an understanding of the soul that closely resembles the Orphic belief that the soul is imprisoned within the body. Similar ideas were later absorbed into both Christianity and Gnosticism. Some scholars have even proposed that the Republic, Plato's longest and perhaps most influential dialogue, is itself set within the underworld. At its opening, Socrates speaks of descending, and Plato deliberately employs the Greek verb from which the concept of katabasis, the descent into the underworld, is derived. Such an interpretation is entirely plausible, especially considering that Socrates had already died and was, symbolically speaking, dwelling in the underworld by the time Plato composed the Republic. Throughout the dialogue, the themes of descent and ascent remain central, culminating in the famous image of the cave, which represents the visible world and the soul's ascent toward the eternal reality of the forms. Certain ancient mystery traditions, many of which were associated with Orphism, regarded earthly life itself as a kind of underworld, while death represented liberation from that condition. This symbolism appears repeatedly throughout Plato's philosophy. In the Apology, the Gorgias, the Phaedo, and the Phaedrus, the soul is consistently portrayed as journeying after death toward a higher and heavenly realm, the very reality that lies beyond the cave in the Republic. There are also interpretations suggesting that the Symposium contains katabatic symbolism connected with ritual wine ceremonies associated with the Orphic worship of Dionysus and with the mysteries of the underworld. The Dionysus of the Orphic tradition is often identified with Bacchus and is sometimes connected with Zagreus, although this latter identification remains uncertain because the surviving sources are too limited to establish it with complete confidence. Nevertheless, later philosophers frequently associated Dionysus with Zagreus, who is often linked to rituals involving the consumption of raw flesh. Zagreus is commonly described as the child form of Dionysus, who was torn apart by the Titans. According to the principal version of the myth, Zagreus, the earlier incarnation of Dionysus, is born as the son of Zeus and Persephone. Zeus declares the child to be his successor, provoking the jealousy of Hera. She persuades the Titans to destroy the young god. The Titans deceive Zagreus by presenting him with a mirror and children's toys before dismembering and consuming him. Athena rescues only his heart and reveals the crime to Zeus, who strikes the Titans with his thunderbolt. From the ashes left behind after their destruction, sinful humanity is brought into existence. Human beings therefore inherit both the Titanic and the Dionysian natures. The body originates from the Titans, while the soul originates from Dionysus. Because of this, the divine soul remains imprisoned within the Titanic body. Orphic teaching therefore declares that the soul returns repeatedly through the cycle of rebirth, bound to the wheel of reincarnation for many successive lives. After the Titans are punished, Apollo carefully gathers together the scattered remains of Zagreus and buries them within his sacred sanctuary at Delphi. The Orphic tradition preserves more than one account of the rebirth of Dionysus. In one version, the preserved heart of Dionysus is placed within the thigh of Zeus, while in another, Zeus impregnates the mortal woman Semele, bringing about the literal rebirth of Dionysus. These traditions differ considerably from the versions found in many classical authors. The philosopher Damascius writes that Apollo gathers Dionysus back together and raises him once more. Within the Orphic mysteries, Dionysus or Bacchus is understood as a darker deity associated with the underworld, while Apollo belongs to the heavens and to the higher divine realms. Since the Dionysian element within human beings is believed to be imprisoned upon the earth, which itself is often understood as a form of death or the underworld, Apollo becomes the divine power that rescues the soul from its titanic imprisonment. Through Apollo's saving action, the soul rises again from death into true life. For this reason, the Pythagoreans honored both Apollo and Dionysus, although Apollo occupied a particularly important place because he represented salvation and the restoration of the soul. Yet Dionysus remained equally essential, for he symbolized the divine soul present within humanity itself. Plato inherited these Orphic and Pythagorean traditions, and their influence can be clearly recognized in his emphasis upon mathematics, rational inquiry, music as a means of healing, and education as the cultivation of the soul. From Socrates he inherited dialectic, while Socrates himself declared in the Apology that his philosophical mission was dedicated to Apollo, after the priestess at Delphi proclaimed him the wisest man in Athens. From Parmenides, Plato inherited the philosophy of being, and from Heraclitus the philosophy of becoming. Using these inherited traditions, Plato constructed dialogues in which ideas that already existed within Greek culture were brought into conversation with one another. Even the sophists have their place within his philosophy, although Plato clearly favors those thinkers who devoted themselves to understanding the cosmos rather than merely mastering rhetoric. Out of these diverse traditions he composed all of his dialogues, contributing perhaps a number of original insights of his own. Yet Plato almost never arrives at final and absolute conclusions. It is often claimed that he proposed an abstract and systematic picture of reality, but such a doctrine is nowhere to be found in his writings. Instead, what one finds is an ongoing dialectic among ideas, accompanied by myths that communicate philosophical truths. I believe this union of sacred mythology with rational philosophical discussion is the most profoundly Orphic characteristic of Plato's philosophy. It is this remarkable synthesis that makes Plato's thought unlike any philosophical system that existed either before him or after him. For this reason, while Plato directed the Academy, there existed no fixed doctrine, only continual discussion and dialogue among different ideas. In many respects, Plato established the intellectual foundation of the Western world by offering a model for debate rather than dogmatism. His philosophy is not a rigid system of beliefs, but a path of transformation for the soul. It functions as a form of initiation into the mysteries, through which the soul seeks to align itself as fully as possible with truth. I believe this is why no philosopher has ever surpassed Plato in influence. Most philosophers present their own ideas as finished conclusions, whereas Plato absorbs the ideas of others. He takes them into himself, assimilates them, and allows them to become part of his own life and soul. While many philosophers project their thoughts outward, Plato inwardly receives and transforms them. This, I believe, is the only genuine path toward truth, because truth is ultimately expressed through the way one lives rather than merely through what one says. Nietzsche criticized Plato for supposedly escaping into a world beyond ordinary existence, but I believe this interpretation fundamentally misunderstands his philosophy. For Plato, the world of becoming is precisely the place where the soul undergoes purification. The soul may be understood as the body of the god Dionysus, and while it exists in its earthly condition, it is gradually purified through the pursuit of knowledge together with the ecstatic practices associated with the mysteries. The ecstasy of Dionysus is experienced through participation in sacred rites, and through these lived experiences the soul acquires genuine knowledge. Reason then serves as the instrument by which this experience is understood, transformed, and elevated, enabling the soul to rise from the underworld, or from the cave into the light. Plato had a deep reverence for the sacred teachings of the mysteries, but he criticized the degraded practice of his time, because the mysteries moved away from this sacred dimension. For example, he criticized priests who claimed they could offer salvation for payment, and he criticized those who participate in the mysteries as a form of entertainment. The use of substances that was meant to serve a sacred purpose was used for drug parties. Plato never taught that bodily existence is inherently evil. Rather, bodily life becomes harmful only when it is misunderstood. Evil, in his view, is fundamentally ignorance. When earthly existence is directed toward bringing the soul into harmony with the divine order, and toward the resurrection of Dionysus through the light of Apollo, who symbolizes truth and reason, then bodily life becomes something profoundly good. Plato consistently maintains that the material world itself is good, while ignorance alone gives rise to evil. Evil therefore consists in the failure to recognize the goodness already present within reality. It is not an independent force existing on its own, but a form of illusion that mistakes the true nature of the world. Once ignorance is overcome and the soul is restored to harmony, it becomes clear that evil was never anything more than deception concerning the true character of existence. In Plato's Symposium, the dialogue centers upon eros, or love, revealing how the human soul, when directed toward the love of wisdom, toward Sophia, brings its desires into harmony with reason. This is the ascent of the Dionysian dimension of human nature, where the soul rises through ecstatic experience toward the realm of ideas and toward a meaningful mode of existence. This is the true form of intoxication, not the intoxication produced by earthly food or drink, but the nourishment belonging to the gods themselves. The soul becomes truly intoxicated only when it ascends into the heavenly banquet shared with the divine, where the gods partake of nectar and ambrosia, the food and drink of immortality. Such a state is not attained merely through physical drunkenness brought about by wine. Rather, it is achieved by leading the soul through the experiences of the mystery religions until it drinks the genuine wine of the soul and the mind. As we already mentioned, these mystery traditions sometimes included physical intoxication and use of substances capable of producing experiences resembling death. Through undergoing such symbolic death, the soul comes to understand its own condition within the underworld. This experience of bodily intoxication becomes an instrument of purification, which is then completed through reason together with the philosophical and religious teachings accompanying these rites. In this way, the experience of death and ecstasy reveals the true structure of reality. Knowledge can therefore be attained only through the soul, through the direct experience of truth itself. Reason serves as the faculty that allows this experience to be properly interpreted, embodied, and integrated into the soul. By doing so, the soul is shaped, harmonized, and purified until it reaches a state of genuine blessedness, ascending into heaven and entering the divine banquet where it shares in the life of the gods. This, I believe, is the authentic meaning of Platonic philosophy. It is not primarily concerned with abstract concepts or intellectual constructions. It is a philosophy of initiation and of the ascent of the soul. It teaches us how to live and how to die. It concerns the soul's direct experience of ideas rather than the mere formulation of theories. Its purpose is not to construct mathematical systems capable of explaining reality, but to participate in reality itself by living according to eternal ideas. Everything in Plato's philosophy ultimately concerns life. Everything else remains secondary. For Plato, the soul is the central reality. It is the seed of life, the organ through which all experience becomes possible, and the principle around which the whole of existence revolves. In a profound sense, the soul is reality itself. Plato's philosophy can only be fully understood once it is recognized that his rational conclusions are not simply intellectual models or textual explanations of the world. Their significance lies entirely in the way they transform our manner of living. This is why Plato devoted himself to dialogue among opposing perspectives, to learning continuously, to absorbing ideas, and through that process gaining the experience necessary for life itself. His philosophy is not primarily concerned with proving reality or gathering evidence for particular explanations. Its essential concern is teaching the soul how to ascend, how to pass through the underworld, and how to acquire the wisdom required for the journey that lies ahead. This journey is the journey of the soul, liberation from ignorance, participation in ecstatic union with the divine, and the attainment of true immortality through the food of the gods, the intellectual nourishment of the soul, and the nectar of eternal life within the world of the forms, all reached through the love of wisdom. For Plato, immortality is not a physical condition, just as life itself is not merely physical. Both belong fundamentally to the soul and to the intellect. They are attained through the harmonization of the soul by means of reason and through the direct experience of eternity achieved by ascending from the cave, or the underworld, into the realm of light. For Plato, both the cave and the heavenly world of light are intellectual realities, not simply allegories constructed from physical images, but genuine dimensions of the soul's existence. For Plato, the physical world is itself intellectual in nature. The material universe is nothing other than soul expressed through its ideas. Matter itself participates in intellect. Consequently, the intellectual journey through the underworld and the cave is also reflected in our physical journey through earthly existence. This is precisely why earthly life can be understood as a kind of underworld from which we must acquire wisdom before ascending into eternal life. It has always seemed evident to me that Plato participated in the mystery traditions. His philosophy is filled with initiatory symbolism, sacred mythology, and theological imagery. Nearly every dialogue contains religious themes interwoven with philosophical discussion. Orpheus was traditionally regarded as the founder of many Greek mystery traditions, including the Eleusinian, Dionysian, and Bacchic mysteries. Yet one of the central requirements before entering these mysteries was the oath that whatever occurred within them should never be revealed openly. For this reason, Plato presents myths, symbols, and teachings, but never directly describes the rituals themselves. Instead, his dialogues become a form of initiation in their own right. The love of wisdom is therefore not merely an intellectual discipline, but an act of devotion. Philosophy is, at its deepest level, religious in character. Wisdom herself is the goddess Sophia, and the true philosopher becomes a participant in her sacred tradition. Throughout mythology, there are countless stories in which this archetype of Sophia appears as a woman whose love guides the hero toward Gnosis. Such is the true meaning of the love of wisdom, the force that draws the soul toward its own realization. Orpheus himself appears in the Symposium, although Plato criticizes him for lacking the courage to sacrifice himself out of love. Since the Symposium is fundamentally concerned with love, Plato recalls how Orpheus descended into the underworld seeking Eurydice. Yet because he was unwilling to die in order to be reunited with the one he loved, he entered the realm of the dead while still alive and was ultimately punished for failing to offer his own life for love. Dionysus, the god who symbolizes the soul, therefore sends his followers to destroy him, preventing his ascent toward immortality, which is represented through his devotion to Apollo, the god of eternal youth, light, and truth. Apollo is like the sun itself, corresponding to the form of the good, the ultimate source of all reality within Plato's philosophy. Seen in this way, Plato, as the philosophical heir of Orpheus and Pythagoras, and as a follower of both Dionysus and Apollo, is much more than a philosopher. He is equally a poet and a creator of myth. Many have criticized Plato for his devotion to reason, while at the same time including myths that appear irrational within his dialogues. Yet I would argue that myth is, in many respects, the most rational element of the dialogue. Mythology is never merely myth. It is inseparable from logos. Myth and logos exist together. A myth is not simply a fictional tale, but a narrative that embodies truth, logic, and meaning. Plato understood that genuine poetry does far more than entertain. It shapes the soul because it carries logos within itself. Orpheus stands as the great archetypal poet of the Western tradition. Countless poets after him, together with the heroes of their works, were inspired by his music and by his descent into the underworld, where even the gods were moved by the power of his song and permitted a mortal man to enter in search of the lost part of his own soul. This archetypal descent into the underworld always marks a moment of profound despair through which the soul ultimately comes to know itself. In my own view, poetry represents the highest form of the written word. Among all literary works, my greatest inspirations are the Divine Comedy and Faust. Although these masterpieces share many important themes, I believe Faust is more directly concerned with the inner development of the soul, whereas Dante's comedy presents a broader vision of the cosmos. Yet both unite the soul and the cosmos through a remarkable synthesis of Christian and pagan imagery. In this way they perfectly illustrate the metamorphosis of ideas that shaped the foundations of Western civilization. Like Dante's comedy, Goethe's Faust portrays a descent into hell followed by an ascent through purification toward paradise, where the soul ultimately encounters divine love. These works describe what I believe to be the universal task of every soul. They portray the archetypal conflict between angels and demons, in which the powers of darkness are ultimately overcome and the soul is purified through an apocalyptic transformation, just as the cosmos itself is renewed in the Book of Revelation. The soul of the cosmos and the soul of every individual are fundamentally one and the same. Individual persons are not merely small fragments of a larger world soul, rather every individual is by itself simultaneously the fullness of reality. The same archetypal principles that govern the whole universe also govern each of its individual expressions, every galaxy, every solar system, and every planet. I once believed that the universe possessed a single universal soul, while stars and planets were merely material structures without life of their own. Over time I came to regard this as impossible. I now believe, with nearly complete certainty, that stars and planets possess souls and forms of life appropriate to their own nature. Within my philosophy, everything is alive. If reality itself is one immense living organism composed of countless individual souls, then it seems difficult to imagine that planets and stars alone would exist as entirely lifeless objects. When we observe the Earth or the solar system, we see patterns of order, interaction, and continual activity that do not appear merely mechanical or completely devoid of living energy. I do not suggest that planets think as human beings do. Rather, they possess a mode of life appropriate to themselves, perhaps resembling an immense electromagnetic or even plant-like vitality. Every planet displays its own characteristic manner of existing, each breathing and living according to its own nature while participating in the wider community of space. A solar system resembles a family composed of planets gathered around their parent star, while each galaxy is like a town or village inhabited by its own unique community. The world soul continually channels the structures of reality from the eternal intellectual treasury of meaning, shaping those meanings into the countless forms that appear throughout existence. This perpetual process of formation is the very movement of history itself on every level. Within material conditions, the rise and fall of civilizations, the development of societies, and the unfolding of human consciousness. All of these are ultimately one and the same reality, different reflections and metamorphoses of eternal meaning continually expressed through the living cosmic intellect. Goethe's Faust is much more than the story of a single man. I regard Goethe as a prophetic figure who, through this poem, anticipated the character of modernity itself. Faust embodies the modern individual, an intellectual whose relentless search for knowledge ultimately leads him into nihilism because he cannot attain genuine wisdom. In pursuing ultimate understanding, he descends into hell, not as a physical place, but within the depths of his own soul, where he enters into a pact with the devil. His loss of faith in life and his inability to discover lasting purpose arise directly from his misunderstanding of the true nature of the divine. Although Faust is capable of perceiving God through nature and through life itself, he cannot yet comprehend the fullness of God's love or the deeper meaning of Christianity. He represents the modern person who has become separated from God. Yet through his love for Margaret, who through her purity and faith awakens the divine spark within Faust, he gradually acquires wisdom. In Faust, we see various sacred feminine figures that can be representations of Sophia. The closest maybe to this symbolism is Helen of Troy, which connects the work with ancient Greek tradition and its initiation into the mysteries of love for wisdom. Helen is at one point united with Faust in what can be described as alchemical marriage, which represents the completion of the first stage in the making of the philosopher's stone, a child of wisdom. While completing the final act of Faust, Goethe depicts the figure of the Mater Gloriosa, who receives Faust's redeemed soul. At this concluding moment, all the major currents of Goethe's spiritual life converge: Christian pietism, Hermetic philosophy, and Gnostic symbolism. The sacred mountain, reminiscent of Montserrat, becomes inhabited by penitent women such as Gretchen, the Samaritan woman, and Mary of Egypt, all gathered beneath the Queen of Heaven. Above them sounds the famous final chorus proclaiming that everything transient is only a parable, that what seems inadequate becomes fulfilled, that the indescribable is accomplished, and that the eternal wisdom continually draws humanity upward. Goethe rediscovered what the Gnostics, Hermetic philosophers, and alchemists had long maintained: that redemption is achieved not by escaping the material world but by illuminating it through spirit. In Dante's Divine Comedy, likewise, Virgin Mary, who in Paradiso is depicted as the Queen of Heaven, sends Virgil and Beatrice to guide Dante towards God. For this reason, during the beginning of his journey, Dante is guided through hell and purgatory by Virgil, the great Roman poet whose writings were deeply influenced by the wisdom traditions of antiquity and by currents of thought later associated with Neoplatonism. After he purified his soul, Dante meets Beatrice, who guides him to the high point of heaven, where, interestingly, he is guided to the end by Bernard of Clairvaux, venerated as Saint Bernard, who was an abbot, mystic, co-founder of the Knights Templar, and a major leader in the reform of the Benedictines through the nascent Cistercian order. As a Mariologist, Bernard was not original but exceptionally effective at spreading devotion to Jesus' mother, since his preaching attracted a large audience. He emphasized Mary's humility and insisted on her central role in Christian theology. He developed the theology of her role as co-redemptrix and mediator. He famously called Mary an aqueduct of grace. Dante has Bernard speak a profound Marian prayer at the beginning of the 33rd canto of the Paradiso. In Goethe's Faust, Bernard appears as a Doctor Marianus, a committed devote of the Virgin Mary. There is an ancient tradition concerning Pythagoras which tells that he descended into the underworld and returned alive. The underworld consistently appears as the place into which one descends during moments of crisis, ignorance, and spiritual need, driven by the ecstatic longing symbolized by Dionysus. The return from that descent always signifies an ascent toward light, wisdom, and truth, all of which are represented by Apollo. Homer may likewise be understood as a mystical poet whose work bears strong affinities with the Orphic tradition. His blindness was often interpreted symbolically, suggesting that his vision belonged not to the visible world but to a higher spiritual reality. At the opening of both the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer invokes the Muses to inspire his poetry. According to tradition, Orpheus himself was the son of a muse, while Apollo, leader of the Muses, bestowed upon him the lyre. Orpheus consequently came to be regarded as one of the great founders of Greek civilization, and his religious tradition profoundly influenced later philosophical and religious thought. Odysseus also undertakes a descent into the underworld, seeking the knowledge necessary to complete his journey home to his beloved wife and son. This descent always serves as a path toward love. In Dante's Divine Comedy, Beatrice fulfills a similar role. She represents both love and wisdom, embodying the figure of Sophia, who guides Dante toward the love of God, the first light and the ultimate source of all reality. Dante himself declares that this divine love is the power that moves the stars.